Action. Okay. What's up, Sue? How you doing? We are live.
Great to be here on the
All right.
live stream. Let's get into it. All things energy.
To all 4 of my followers that are watching this, thanks for coming. And this is Sue. She's head of investor and government relations at Hut 8.
Hi,
Sue,
guys. Nice to see you.
give us
Nice
a wave.
to be here.
So I was saying before we hopped on, I'm really interested in trying to understand and educate myself about energy. And from what little I understand, the USA is drastically behind China. AI is fundamentally limited in USA unless we break open our energy capacity.
Right.
And so you seem to be one of the people that are at the forefront of it. The first video I saw of you was talking about the new ERCOT rules and things of that stuff, which all over my head. So maybe you can just start by, let's say I'm a 5th grader and you're teaching the class. What is energy? And can you maybe give us some understanding of like how do the economics of this work in the old world versus where we're heading with AI?
So I think the big reason why there's now all this hysteria around like the dearth of power availability in the US, and yes, we are in a race with China with respect to power and AI and security, etc. What started this? So effectively what happened is the US went from a period of having almost 0% year-over-year growth in terms of energy demand to having like 3% growth year over year in terms of energy demand, which doesn't sound like a lot when you have old, antiquated pipes and pipelines and grids that are powering cities and homes. That sudden influx of new users wanting to use power on your grid that is already pretty antiquated has created a tremendous amount of issues. And so effectively, grids haven't been updated. Transmission infrastructure is in the process of being updated, but there's all these rules that are fragmented. Like there's federal, state, and then local rules in terms of how energy gets built, how deals get done. And it wasn't a big issue until suddenly you had this new use case of AI, and because AI uses a tremendous amount of power. So the advent of AI blew up. Everyone and their mom and every AI user needs a ton of power, but these traditional grid infrastructures are not designed to support all this new power. And so we're now in a situation where there's a tremendous amount of demand for AI, which needs a ton of power. We're in a race with China in order to have sort of AI dominance, but there's like a 45 gigawatt dearth between what is required to power AI and then what is actually available on the existing grid infrastructure and in the transmission lines and whatnot of what is actually available, if that makes sense.
Yes.
So in the past like 24 months, you've seen this uptick in all these like new solutions to meet this tremendous demand for power because of AI that are not traditional. You've seen new markets open up for AI data centers that have never normally been markets where a data center would ever get built. And that's all because, again, the grid, traditional energy systems in the US, the grid was not designed to scale fast. And we've got this whole, and anyway, so that's sort of where we're at. And we can certainly get into what sort of those new solutions look like, but I've been on a bit of a sojourn there, but that's sort of what's happened is you had this traditional infrastructure that was status quo, and then out of nowhere in blew this new massive customer, and the grid just could not scale with that customer's needs, and that customer is AI.
Okay, awesome way to set the table. I took notes, so we'll try to go through it one by one.
Okay, great.
Let me think about the right place to start.
Okay.
So when you say 45 gigawatt discrepancy of what we need to power AI,
yeah,
are you projecting that into the future, or are you saying right now we're already that far behind on what we need for AI today?
So those are Morgan Stanley's projections,
Mm-hmm.
and McKinsey and Jefferies and a lot of massive banks and research think tanks. This is what they've projected, and it's about 49 gigawatts over the next 3 to 5 years. Okay. That is required based on what hyperscalers, so the Metas, the Facebooks, the the Googles of the world are saying, the Anthropics are saying that they need in order to meet their AI ambitions, their token generation, etc.
Okay, so starting kind of like a slide deck, we'll focus on the problem first. So that's clearly a problem. We're missing a lot of what we're going to need in the next few years. 3% year-over-year growth is the heart of that problem. That's the reasoning, or is that even before AI and actually we need higher growth rate?
The AI was like the catalyst for that growth profile increase.
Okay. And the grid is not designed to scale fast.
Not designed to scale fast. Utilities, so the sort of overlords of how power gets distributed on the grid, they're not designed to scale alongside Zuck or Jensen.
Right.
That's just not how it works. And so again, you have this mismatch of speed and demand relative to actual like infrastructure design and availability.
Makes sense. So essentially utilities need to start moving at breakneck speed of tech companies.
But they're not designed to do that, because utilities are not incentivized to suddenly increase their revenues by 9x. What utilities need to do is guarantee to their customers that their bills are not going to go up exponentially,
right,
and that they're going to be able to provide them with reliable power. Now, when you have, and one of the big issues that's been coming up is part of when, let's say, a Meta goes to a utility provider and says, okay, I need a gigawatt of power. And the utility says, okay, great, I can give that to you. Usually that build out process for extra power falls under the transmission and distribution line of a customer's power bill. And so there's been a tremendous amount of pushback from local communities saying, why are we funding Meta's desire and need for power if this is going to screw my bill? Also AI, because when you're training an algorithm, that creates like massive surges of power usage and then periods of downtime. Because like when you're training an AI, you can have like 72-hour pushes, and then there's downtime and 72-hour pushes, which can also cause grid instability. If the grid is unstable, that can cause rolling blackouts, that can cause like a plethora of different problems. And so you have all these different factors at play right now. And that's sort of what's happening.
And my understanding is, in the old world, a Bitcoin miner could look at the pricing, say, all right, it's too much, we're going to turn everything off today, no problem. Nowadays with AI, it's got to be running 24/7, and so you can't scale up and down with pricing, or am I misunderstanding?
So not really. So some iterations of AI compute, it is curtailable load. And in general, when a grid is under stress, and this is one of the big misconceptions out there, the first people who are told to power down or whose power goes out is not Joe Blow and his wife sitting at home. It's the massive load user. So it would be like a data center, like an AI data center would be the first to be curtailed. Also, Google, for example, came out, I think it was August, I can't remember if it was August 24 or August 25, and they actually said that they were committed to curtailing their operations if the grid so required, because like we talked about, not all AI needs to be on 24/7. If it's a data center that's doing inference, aka you're providing, you're using AI for traffic lights and or like a hospital. I mean, even if you're not using, you don't need AI for a hospital or traffic lights. Those types of use cases, yes, have to be on 24/7. The data centers powering those use cases, but there's a lot of different load profiles where you can power up and power down and be more sort of a dynamic load on grids.
And the federal, state, local rules are the ones determining the load profiles of those.
Well, so there's a bit of like a disconnect right now. So for example, China is beating us in terms of their ability to stand up new energy infrastructure. And I guess you could say that is one of the benefits of communism, is there's not a lot of people who can push back. But in the US, you have the federal government that's saying, we need to win in AI, we need to streamline this process, we need to have a bunch of rules that everyone can understand, everyone can follow. On the state level, they say, okay, great, but I need to make sure my customers' power doesn't go out. I need to make sure my grids are still working, because if not, then I'm not going to get elected again. And same thing for local officials. And so there's bifurcated permitting from a federal, state, and local perspective. Like they're all sort of bifurcated permitting processes, because everyone kind of has different needs and different stakeholders. And so that's part of the reason why it's been very difficult to compete with China in terms of standing up all the energy that is required to meet this new user of power, is because a lot of it's getting held up in permitting. A lot of it's getting held up in those sort of market forces. And now the added nuance is you're getting a lot of citizens pushing back
Right.
in small communities being like, no, you're going to screw me on my power bills. Why the hell would I agree to have this data center in my backyard? So it's a really interesting time. But again, all of these sort of opposing forces have resulted, like mother's the necessity of innovation, as they say. And so what has happened is a lot of these guys, like Bitcoin miners, who are using power, just like minding their business, using power in weird locations no one cared about. And now suddenly everyone was like, shit, I can't get power. This regulator won't let me do this. This utility is at maximum capacity. Hey, but you, HUD 8, you're sitting on this power over here. Do you mind if I use it for AI? So that's what's now driven the market to look at non-traditional data center markets to stand up data centers like Texas, for example, looking at Bitcoin miners. We've now seen the rise of fuel cells as a potential like bridge solution, which is super interesting. Bloom Energy. That's the lay of the land.
And so for a company like HUD 8, whoever AI hyperscaler comes to you or whatever it ends up being, and they say, okay, we want to basically lease out what you already have. And then does HUD 8 as a business say, okay, well, this is a massive opportunity. Let's go get as much capacity as possible, either through the public grid or figuring out some sort of private method or using storage and things like the fuel cells. Is that correct?
So I would say one thing that's different about HUD 8 versus anyone else in this industry is we've been in Bitcoin mining for a very long time, like since like 2018. And since about 2021, we had a thesis. Well, this is Asher, our current CEO. We merged with his company in 2023. But Asher, our CEO, had a thesis that the value of the electron was going to continue to evolve over time. And Bitcoin mining was always our tool. Long before this AI use case, Bitcoin mining was always our tool for capturing cheap megawatts at scale. Because how do you mine a Bitcoin? You need super cheap power, you need a container, and you need a Starlink satellite. That's pretty much the three things you need. And so before this AI use case, we were running around the US basically saying, let's lock up as many megawatts as possible, because our thesis was, okay, if Elon's going to shoot all those rockets into space, he's going to need a shit ton of hydrogen. If manufacturing does actually ever repatriate to the US, that's going to need a ton of power. And so we always had this thesis of building this tremendous pipeline using Bitcoin mining as our hedging tool. And then it just so happens that AI ended up being that first next use case. And so why I say that is because HUD 8, we actually haven't converted any of our existing sites. What's happened is this huge pipeline that we built, we then were like, well, wait a minute, maybe we're going to use this for AI. Maybe we should talk to, Anthropic and Fluidstack and Google about this, keep our mining sites on because we're earning cash and it's not in like super palatable areas just yet, but because not every Bitcoin mine is eligible for AI data center conversion. But anyhow, that's sort of some of the differentiation in terms of HUD 8 relative to the rest of the group.
So you've been Trojan horsing it from 2018 to now.
Yeah. I mean, and that's our CEO, Asher. That was his thesis from day one.
Okay, so value of the electron. And then how do you think about, it seems like the government's always going to be slightly behind demand given this new world of the public grid. So I'm reading about, it sounds like, these Meta will end up basically building power plants.
Yeah, it's possible.
And doing their own private generation. Is that where the world heads? If China has communism and they can do all this through the government, and we have capitalism and private industry, I assume a lot of this ends up being privatized into, unpublic utility.
Yeah. Building your own generation. If this idea of it's not necessarily going to end up being build your own generation, because one of the things Anthropic came out and said this last week, Microsoft came out and said this too. They basically said, hey, we're going to make sure your power bills don't go up. because as I explained earlier, it's that transmission and distribution line. When you're building out that new power, where those costs usually get put onto the ratepayers, Anthropic, Microsoft, etc., is saying, guys, we're going to pay for that. Because the other nuance is that a lot of these hyperscalers, they still want to be able to they still want to be connected to grids, because in the event of a power failure, you can rely on the grid for backup, like, because the grid is always on. Mm-hmm. So I think what we're going to see is this idea of, yes, of excuse me, hybrid solutions. So nat gas storage, like battery storage, renewables, battery storage, renewables, grid. We're gonna, but what's going to be, I would say, the new norm is that the hyperscalers are the ones who are funding these build outs. It is not being passed on to consumers. That's what's going to be the new norm.
So let me repeat that just to make sure I understand. So we need grid expansion.
Yeah.
We also, at the same time, can't allow people like me, normies, to pay more.
Correct.
So Meta will pay for the expansion.
That's
which
right.
is literally Meta's paying for construction.
That's right.
And
distribution, yeah.
Yeah, and they will pay for over whatever, rule that I'm not allowed to pay over as a citizen. Meta will cover that bill.
That is where the industry is trending. The other thing I think that isn't out there enough in the media is utility operators have a lot of fixed costs that, regardless of who's on the grid, they have to cover. That goes to the end consumer, you, me, right. Meta, whoever. If you have more larger players that you're able to amortize those costs across, that ultimately ends up lowering bills for consumers, right? Instead of just you and me footing the bill for some of the fixed costs that come with the utility providers that have nothing to do with AI. There's fixed costs, just, grid upgrades, right. Transmission and distribution upgrades, etc. We do have to cover that. But again, now if you have like Meta in the mix, that's more people covering for that cost pool. So it's actually not a bad thing when you look at it that way as well.
You used to sell securities, I believe, or something of the sort. So everyone loved correct me if I'm wrong here, but based on what you just said, it sounds like utility companies become more asset light in their responsibilities, and tech companies become more asset heavy. That's the trade that is happening.
Yeah, I think I would say there's going to have to be more cash outlay for the hyperscalers in order to get the power that they want. Like, they're going to have to, yeah. There's going to be like dual tariff structures. I'm not sure if I'd call it asset light, asset heavy, because it's just sort of, because like the hyperscalers aren't going to own the transmission and distribution lines, but they're going to pay for that. They're going to like subsidize the utilities build out.
They'll service some portion of the debt.
Exactly. They'll service some portion of the costs associated with that.
So utilities actually get a pretty great deal here over time, because they're getting more without having to pay as much interest on.
Technically.
Interesting. Okay, so from your perspective, like, are we going to lose to China? What needs to happen? Here's this was hilarious. Hopefully you'll laugh. I was talking to the guy I was telling you about earlier that's building something in Oregon, and he was saying he was talking with the city council or whoever approves it, and their first point was, look, if you're building a 50 megawatt data center, it can't happen because AI is going to come here and take jobs. So he said, okay, what if we build a 200 megawatt data center? Then we'll create jobs. And then the city council person says, oh, but imagine the traffic. And I feel like that mindset is really going to slow us down. To your point earlier, federal, state, local rules. Are we all motivated to actually do this or not?
No, I would say in a lot of areas people aren't. And again, look, if you've been farming on a piece of land for hundreds of families and farming for hundreds of years, I can understand how, the big globalist, cowboy coming in and messing up your backyard, taking your land, repurposing it for use that you don't understand. I can definitely appreciate how that would be very scary as like a small town resident. I get that. But you make very good points, and that is definitely what's happening. Is I think that the media is really spinning the actual facts and reality here in the wrong way, and it's becoming super anti-big tech, anti-Zuck, etc. But it's like, guys, there's a lot of benefits that some of these projects bring to these super rural communities. We bring jobs, we bring tax revenues, we bring, again, in general, more of the fixed costs that come with utilities now get amortized across more players, which will ultimately reduce your bill. Data centers also do not pull power from the same pool that is allocated for your power. So it's like, it's very, I think the media is not helping any of us, and a lot more education is required in some of these more rural areas where these new data centers and power markets are popping up.
Unless Meta comes out and says, we're just going to pay everyone's tax bill or utility bill.
Yeah.
I got to imagine there's no way that that's going to be understood at a massive scale.
Yeah. Yeah. But that's where, like, again, people like me who are technically in government relations, like, part of the thing that we do is educate populations on, like, what are the actual realities. Like, let's walk through the data. Let's walk through the facts about, like, what's actually happening here.
Mm-hmm. Okay, last question, and then we'll wrap up. Let's make it a good one. So, okay, I first learned about you because you were talking about Texas and ERCOT. Again, assuming I'm a fifth grader, can you explain to me what is ERCOT? Why is Texas seemingly like the most important place right now? And how does that evolve to the other states so that we can get out of our own way, but also not hurt all of the citizens?
So Texas is an unregulated energy market. Texas has its own grid. And Texas, again, further to this now suddenly new, as of 2 years ago, new user and eater of power demand in massive chunks, AI. Mm-hmm. Texas was this one market that was super rich in power. There's a ton of renewables and nat gas and wind. There's some nuclear there too. Texas became, in the past few years, a super hotbed for AI data activity because it was an unregulated market, aka it made it a little bit easier to get deals done there, to get your power online. You didn't have to jump through as many hoops. But because suddenly everyone flocked to Texas and this became the new data center market, the Texas grid then became overloaded. So, like, at the end of 2025, there was something like 225 gigawatts worth of load requests in Texas, which is like unprecedented. The grid could not handle that. And so the regulators, what they did is they were like, okay, we have to slow this down. And so they've come out with
for context. So there's 225 gigawatts of load requests. What is the capacity of Texas? Like 20 gigawatts?
No. To be honest, I actually don't have the most recent capacity figures, but I can tell you it certainly is in no ballpark available to accommodate that amount of load. And so ERCOT, which is the grid operator, said, okay, everyone has to slow down. Mm-hmm. We're not just going to approve every, mom and pop shop or every hyperscaler deal that comes down the pipeline asking for X amount of power. That's not how this is going to go anymore. So we got to slow down. Now, and so what's happened is ERCOT, which is the grid operator, has come out with some different ideas in terms of how to make sure deals still get done, power gets added to the grid, revenues come to local counties, etc., without overwhelming the grid, without breaking the grid. So there's been a plethora of different ideas discussed on that front. We do think Texas is still going to be a hot market, but is it going to be as hot or as easy to get deals done there as it was in 23, 24? Probably not, because again, they've had to structure it so that things slow down and that there's more thoughtful build out.
And where is the next location that happens?
Well, so
Nashville?
No. So I think, again, everywhere throughout the US, we're seeing a real sort of uptick in a bit of pushback and let's make sure we do this thoughtfully, because everywhere has seen a tremendous amount of power demand. But HUD 8, for example, we signed a deal with Google, Anthropic, and Fluidstack in Louisiana. Louisiana is a super interesting market. Lots of industrial activity in Louisiana that got retired or got repatriated overseas with the outsourcing of manufacturing supply chains. So Louisiana is a really interesting opportunity market because it has a ton of generation, super skilled workforces, a very accommodating and governor who wants to attract more revenues to the state, more jobs, more opportunities. So they really get it there. I'm not saying other states don't get it, but where you are, the regulatory climate, and how supportive some of the regulators are really is going to start to matter more as this power scarcity and AI demand story continues to evolve.
Google, Anthropic, Fluidstack, that's insane. Especially if you can do all these deals with Fluidstack going forward. I mean, that's going to be amazing.
I mean, Anthropic is super exciting too, right? Like they have
of course.
the enterprise market. We're super jazzed to have a relationship with them.
And at some point, hopefully you can get to Amazon through Anthropic or however that ends up working out too.
I mean, look, we're chatting with everyone. We're all friends. We chat with everybody. But yeah, we're really excited to have Google and Anthropic in our wheelhouse, and we welcome all of these new relationships. So
cool. All right, so we have one person watching on YouTube. Thank you.
Nice.
Yeah, awesome. I do have a newsletter with a few thousand people, so I think this will get views. So as a closing message, what do you, and most of them are VCs, startup founders, or investors. If you had a fund, how would you think about these opportunities? What would you do as an investor?
So I would definitely be investing in these power solutions. So obviously not just like the Bitcoin miner to AI conversion stories, but like the bridge solutions, like the Bloom Energies of the world. There's a pre-IPO company called Mainspring that's super interesting. But honestly, and I do see my sort of Twitterverse is starting to talk more about this now, AI, batteries, all of this requires a tremendous amount of metals and natural resources, copper, uranium. If we're actually going to get serious about SMR as a nuclear technology, we need a shit ton of uranium. We need copper. There is not enough copper to fund this build out of AI and these chip factories, et cetera. So I am personally making plays, not investment advice, into copper, uranium, rare earths, as well, on top of any sort of energy infrastructure solution. I think is really the future.
Awesome. Yes. Disclaimer for anybody. None of this was investment advice.
Investment advice. Yeah.
I'm trying to learn here. All right, Sue, that was awesome. Thank you so much. Give a little wave and then I'll end this live stream here. All right.